Thank you, Dr. Pearce. Let's go back then to item 10 on page 41.
This is Prezzo there.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce this paper and welcome Douglas Burney from Sapir Group, who's going to step through a bit of a presentation on the work that he's done.
Before we start, order, please.
Just by way of background, the desire to prepare the strategy has been built by a realisation from within staff that the way we do business in commissioning science and research could be better, and also that comments and communications and engagement with partners and stakeholders in the community also reflects that. So the strategy has been designed as an internal and external document. You could say it's largely operational while it's strategic, but it's intended to have us work differently and better internally, and also look to engage externally differently and better than we have in the past to improve the performance in terms of the value that we can get out of our science spend by either aligning the work we do internally or collaborating with external agencies, government and CRIs and universities and the like, and other industries or businesses who have skin in the game and a stake in the outcomes of the work we do. So hence, we ran a process last year to look for people to do this. Fortunately got Sapir Group in, and very pleased with the outcome. Like I say, just reinforcing that this document, it's non-statutory, it is largely operational, but we think it's important, or we thought it was important, to bring it to you to get your approval for this, and also that in preparing it, we worked pretty hard to engage with not only the staff but the broader Hawke Bay community who have some stake in the science and the way we go about doing our business in that space. So Douglas, I'll just get you to jump through your stuff.
Can you all hear me? So who are we? Douglas Burney, I'm from Sapir Research Group. We're an economic consultancy firm based in Wellington, Auckland and in Australasia. The largest in our kind, but we're kind of boutique-y. I've got a background in science management and policy, but I'm not an expert on the Hawke's Bay. So I want to absolutely stress that. But what we have tried to do in this report is come in fresh, have a look, and give some free and frank views, and you can judge whether you're comfortable with those or not. Just trying to improve things.
So what did you do here? Did you write a preamble, or did you write this report here that we've got?
We wrote the strategy document, working with stakeholders and then working through with staff. So the draft strategy you've got in front of you is what we prepared.
This is the strategy document.
Oh, the cover note was.
So Councillor, it's the items that were excluded from the agenda on a separate cover.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yep.
that's what I've got. Yeah.
Yep.
That's the strategy document. Is
Yes. Yep.
So why have one? Why have another policy or strategy document when you've already got a few? As you'd be well aware, you're a key regulatory body in the Hawke's Bay, particularly focusing on your resource management accountabilities, and science is fundamentally important to discharging those accountabilities. And yet when we had a look, came in and spoke to staff and then spoke to 2 sessions with a wide range of your stakeholders, they gave us some slightly different views on their perspectives of the science delivered by the council. So some of the views that, some of the issues that became apparent from some of the staff issues, a lack of formal prioritisation, a lack of planning, a lack of commissioning of work. It tended to rely hugely on personal relationships to get your piece of research done within this very busy organisation. And so if you really wanted to get your piece of work done, you'd go down and sit at their desk and wait until they agreed. Secondly, a perceived lack of appropriate breadth of the research. The nature of the search tended to reflect the questions, for example, that the staff member may have a particular interest in, but may not necessarily reflect all the issues that need to be addressed by that particular science being commissioned. So in short, a lot of the science tends to be commissioned largely on a personal relationship level, which has some advantages, but also has some disadvantages. What did your stakeholders say? We had 2 sessions of a wide spectrum of your stakeholders, from the harder-nosed environmental end to the production end to the iwi group. So we had quite a wide spectrum of perspectives. But what was interesting is by far the majority would agree with this feedback. Collectively they had quite a weak understanding of exactly what science the council was delivering. Many said, we have no idea. They said in their views, some people held this view quite strongly, that the science tended to be commissioned rather narrowly, i.e. the questions being answered would reflect some interest of some parts of the community, but not all parts of the community. They also indicated they really wanted greater involvement in the science as it was undertaken, rather than being presented with the results at the end. And they wanted a greater level of understanding of the challenges around delivering the science. And in saying that, though, they didn't want to be overloaded. And that was the tension that we're trying to manage with the strategy, because they don't want to be overloaded with lots of email information from the council either. Finally, what they did also agree, they wanted to see greater rigour and transparency around the commissioning of science, so it is not only independent, it's perceived to be independent and credible. That was quite important to them. What are the risks to you? You are far better placed to judge whether these risks are reasonable in your circumstances, but from my experience, these are the kind of risks that you face seeing if you allow the current situation to continue. The first is probably the most fundamentally important risk, and that is there's simply less effective utilisation of the research out there in the community. If they're not aware of it, they won't be able to use it. Second one is delays in what are absolutely priority areas of research will have significant consequences for the community. So the delays in delivering the tag research was given an example by many, where they are dead keen to see research results, and their perception is it's taking longer than what they first might have envisaged. Third one, and this is, I know, a rather sensitive one, but you may reduce some of the challenge and litigation of your decision making. Because if people don't like the science, or they disagree with the science, or they think the science has been developed in a vacuum, they'll challenge the science first, not just the decision, and they'll actually draw out decision making far further. When ideally what you want them to do is to have the science relatively clear, and then the debate to be had around the decision. What is the decision that's going to be based on, hopefully, what is relatively agreed science, as far as you're able to do. I'd stress some of these risks are inevitable, and you're always going to get some challenge and debate, and that's healthy, but in our view, you could probably reduce these risks if you take a few simple steps. So what's the purpose of the strategy? The purpose is to describe the role of science, to assess the current state, to set out a future state, and to set out basically some steps that we think, if you agree, you could put in place to try and improve the situation. That's a suggested vision, drawn from your other strategy documents, if you're comfortable, reflecting, for example, your Hawke's Bay regional strategy, drawing that down to reflect the science component of that strategy. The suggested values, I won't go through all of them. There's a couple of key ones in here, though, for you to think about and make sure you're absolutely comfortable with. The fifth one there, transparency. Making sure that the science is distinct from the decisions, and so that people can see the science and then they see the decision, and sometimes where the decision is slightly different from the science, that there's a logic trail to it, and it's completely transparent. So there's no secrets and there's no perceptions of the decision driving what the science should be. About building trust. And that's the second set of values. I won't go through those. Those should all be relatively obvious to you, but obviously happy to discuss those if you feel the need. So what are the initiatives? The first one's probably the most important from your perspective, is actually having a 10-year science plan, potentially as a chapter to your long-term plan that you would consult on every 3 years, and it lays out your research program for the public to see and stakeholders to engage on and decide whether they think those are the right priorities or not. And so they're very clear about what's coming up, and they also start to understand how you just can't turn science on and off like this, that most science tends to be multi-year, that you have to think about in advance, you have to plan it, and then you have to manage expectations around its delivery. So hence a suggested 10-year plan. You would obviously sign off that plan as part of your long-term plan if you agreed with that idea. Oversight of the program by a management committee within the council. Formal planning and commissioning arrangements underneath that. So new research projects couldn't just be slipped in there. They'd have to go through a process to make sure that they formally can be added. Use of in-house resources for when the research is so significant and you need to keep an eye on it, because it may need to evolve, you may need to change the nature of research, but greater use, for example, of contracting out when it's requiring specialist expertise that you don't have, that it's much better just to contract out rather than try and bring that in. And also a greater use of umbrella contracts. So a lot of the contracting at the moment tends to be very piecemeal. That's not uncommon, but rather than have 4 or 5 different parts of the organisation having contracts with the CRI, you'd have one umbrella contract with the CRI, you'd have quoting arrangements in place, so when they want to commission a piece of work with that CRI, it's a quote arrangement. It's a more transparent arrangement. You could still ask them to bid on a multi-year arrangement, but it certainly reduces the paperwork and reduces some of the contract churn that you're seeing at the moment. Finally, regular reporting on the science, how it's going, what the barriers are, what the challenges are, so you're aware of some of the issues with the science and some of the delivery issues if they are becoming apparent. Here's a friend, Frank, for start of 10 in terms of what the priorities should be, potentially, for you to think about when you form up this 10-year plan, if you agreed with this idea. The first one, in our view, was what seemed to us to be the absolutely fundamental obligation of the council in light of your current legal accountabilities as far as we understand them, which is simply the measurement task. It's measuring values, risks, impacts and causes of the resource management, environmental related factors that you're responsible for: water quality, water allocation, air quality, so on and so forth. A fundamentally important role. Second one, potentially application of mitigation and adaptation options for managing impacts. Third one, when you want to partner up with industry to find win-win solutions that deliver 2 to manage 1. And then fourth, just understanding some of the behavioural science aspects about what influences land use decision makers and what the trigger points are for them as to when they're going to change their behaviour, which was a discussion that you just had. So what are the trigger points for land users? Finally, just a further set of initiatives underneath those ones were probably more for the staff, but just in case, just checking with you to make sure you're comfortable, making sure the research reflects a broader set of values and the commissioning of it. Iwi groups are particularly critical of some of the research what they see doesn't really address their questions. They see it as, to be blunt, very Pākehā orientated research. A greater commitment to involve stakeholders up front in research so they're aware of when it's been commissioned. They may get an email, they may be able to join a focus group so they get an email, or they go along to a presentation when there's a particular output or a milestone being delivered, so they're not surprised by the results. Setting staff time aside so they can engage more in that consultative effort. And by the way, your science team is very keen to do that. Some scientists, love being shut away and don't let them out until they've got the answer. Your science team isn't like that. So this is about let's get them out there just to explain their science a bit more to people. Because one of the other pieces of feedback, of course, is some of the science, you just can't dump it out there. Some people won't get it. It's in science language, so it needs to be translated in language that people can understand. So that's the fourth one, which is publishing the results along with plain English summaries, what it means. And then keeping council decisions distinct from the search so people can see the difference, or where the differences are, or where the decisions came from based on credible, robust science. Sound easy? Maybe not quite that easy. The next steps, if you're comfortable, we'd respond to your feedback. The strategy would potentially be published. The team would go ahead and prepare the 10-year plan for the next long-term plan, and then the management committees would be set up, and the email groups, etc., and maybe a web portal for stakeholders to get access to the research would be set up. And this is one area where your stakeholders did indicate some interest and keenness. Quite a few of them indicated they would love to join some of the email groups. For example, if an email group was set up dealing with water quality research in a particular part of the region, I would anticipate you might get quite a number of stakeholders agreeing to go along to that group and then occasionally turn up to a meeting where they get presented with the results of the research in their area. Thank you. That's it from me.
All right. Let's watch the hands go up. Councillor Bevan will start over here.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, thanks for that, and it's certainly quite interesting. I've got a couple of queries. Firstly, on page 5 of the plan strategy document, you've got as one of your bullet points from the science, the government's science challenges, high-value nutrition. I don't think I've ever seen any science that relates to high-value nutrition come out of this building. It's more something that plant and food research would do, for instance. How does that fit with the science that we do here?
Oh, totally agree. The question is whether high-value nutrition research will leverage off some of the base research you're doing on land use, soil use, water quality, water allocation. Does that make sense?
So, Councillor, perhaps a working example of that might be the work that we're doing with Comvita and UMF Mānuka, and it's a high-value food item, you could argue, but the attendant benefit of Mānuka on marginal hill country instead of pastoral farming or other land uses, so you're getting the benefit of a land use change and potential improvement in water quality associated with an industry that is particularly interested in not only health but potentially nutrition.
Yeah, so you're seeing it as the things we do will aid that rather than this be an end goal in itself. Yeah, okay, that sort of makes sense. There's nothing here about staff retention. Well, there's nothing that I saw. Is there?
No, there isn't. That wasn't raised with us as an issue.
That's a bloody huge issue.
That's an HR issue rather than a science issue, isn't it?
Surely it's got to be part of your strategy.
I'd say
to retain key staff.
normally retention is an issue. Certainly it is now for the CRIs because they've got quite a significant ageing population with their scientists, as you'd be well aware. I didn't detect such an issue with the science team. Wasn't raised with us. I did detect a bit of frustration around the building with the current delivery of science, and even there's a bit of frustration with the science team, but nothing fundamentally serious. But I did detect actually a growing acknowledgement this might be a better way, and so it was quite interesting how most of them seemed to buy into these ideas. They're quite comfortable with them, and they're very keen to get out there and explain their science a bit more, for example.
Yeah, I guess I just don't see how we can have a science and technology strategy that doesn't look at least at the issue of retaining key people, because you need that continuity.
Well, as I say, we could look at it if you wish, but it wasn't raised with us as an issue here, but it certainly is with some of the other science organisations.
Yeah, I guess, like, I appreciate your point that I would say broadly within the science community in New Zealand, retaining capability and capacity is an issue because, as Douglas points out, we do have an ageing cohort of scientists, particularly in the CRIs, that are moving towards the end of their work life, and science is it's not seen as a sexy role anymore. We're not getting young scientists into science roles, so we're not getting people coming through to replace them. But it's not an isolated issue for Hawke's Bay. It's a New Zealand Inc. issue because although we do and certainly are active in retaining core capability within the building to deliver things like our groundwater modelling, we also recognise that it's not possible for a council of this size to have all of the right people for the job available to us all of the time, and that people do invariably come and go. But what we would like to do is, through the likes of the strategy, set up much stronger and closer relationships with universities and CRIs so that where change occurs, we can seamlessly fill those gaps, so we're not being impeded by the availability of the right people. But absolutely, recognising the point that was on Douglas's presentation, that retaining a core in-house capability is important. And the Hiratonga groundwater model is a good example where we don't want to contract that out, we want to have that in-house.
Okay.
Can I stress that too, one further point if I may? Some people think, I'll just contract it all out. You have to be able to understand what science you're given. And you have to have people in-house who can interpret and know what science is good science from bad science. So having a core set of science expertise is fundamental to the council.
Completely agree. So Chair, just one more comment from me. On page 9, number 7, desired future state by 2025 and beyond, and then it's a list of the types of things that we want to do, that it's prioritised, that it's managed in collaborative ways, etc., etc. That's 10 years away. And it sounds like we're not doing any of that now, and I read through that and I'm thinking, well, surely that's what we're trying to do now. So I think that heading is a bit sort of misleading, and I think you should think about how it might be better phrased.
Sure.
Thank you. Councillor Scott and then Councillor Melbourne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that presentation. I'd just like to clarify a comment that you made about the direction of the science is often decided by relationships rather than some strategic prioritising. Is that a view of a particular sector, or is it a view across the board by the scientists too?
Free and frank,
Yeah.
my perception, based on the conversations with your staff and some stakeholder feedback. The stakeholder feedback was some of the relationships seemed a bit cosy. For example, between staff and even some of the science providers. So, for example, some of the science providers say we would never bid for some work because we always know you're going to go to X. And it's because John knows Mary and they've known each other for 20 years. So there's a bit of that.
So is that deciding what will be done rather than who will do it?
So that's deciding the who. What will be done can often be influenced by the perspective of the staff member. There probably isn't quite enough organisational scrutiny of the research being commissioned. For example, because there often isn't a document setting out exactly what research is being commissioned. In some cases, it might be just an email trail, and it leads to some research. So there's not what we would describe in a language. Normally you have a research commissioning document setting out exactly what questions are going to be asked, what are the, that kind of stuff. That isn't done in some cases, whereas in some cases it is done across the council. We're simply saying, do it consistently, do it across all.
Can I follow up a question to Mr. Maxwell on that? Because many years ago, we simply, a lot of the science was decided on the strength of the staff that happened to be here and their particular interests. And we actually did make a conscious effort of prioritising science that would meet the program that we needed. Since that time, we've been through a amount of strategic planning, such as the futures considerations, land, water, us, that grew out of that, and where we prioritise our work and our science with it. So why have we got a disconnect? I think it's great that we've moved to a formal strategy, but
Sure.
we haven't been totally in a vacuum.
Sure, and you do make good points that our strategic documents that have gone ahead of this do set out an expectation of coordination and alignment, and I guess at a high level that's the desired outcome, but operationally we haven't necessarily delivered that because in my view science exists in just about every group in council. Even if the engineers don't agree, they are scientists nonetheless because their work revolves around science and science understanding. But anything with an ology in it should fit into this process. We haven't locked in that discipline yet, and this is the intent of the strategy is to lock in that discipline to say there should be an agreed plan in advance, the 10-year plan. And then there's some oversight within council, both at a management level and then through a governance discussion around that goes to the community, and we lock it in and we start our business. And we obviously don't stop reviewing that. We check in every 3 years and make sure we've got that right. And then any work that's commissioned internally has to come in and align with the strategy. And the intent is that goes through the clearinghouse, the management sort of group that we'll formulate to say is what is being proposed here in alignment with the strategy, and is it going to deliver the council's research needs, today and tomorrow. So yes, the high level documents seek that. Operationally we haven't quite got that set up. This is the intent of the strategy.
Could I just one specific in relation to that is on page 10, where again on this desired future state number 7, the last bullet point, there has been sufficient investment in establishing the base information. Can you not turn that on its head as well and ask that the strategy actually identifies what sufficient investment actually is?
We see that in the 10-year plan.
The research-
That's the intent of the research plan and feeding it through the LTP process. And absolutely, and look, just to be absolutely clear, what we're envisaging here is that in the consultative documents and in the discussions with our community, it's not going, the science and research isn't going to be buried in amongst everything else. It'll be specifically pulled out into its own discussion so that people can clearly see it and they'll know what resourcing is involved and required into the future.
What we've talked about around the exec table in relation to this is actually in the next long-term plan or annual plan, whenever you wish. We actually have this science and technology research plan sitting alongside the infrastructure strategy, for example. So even though it's not a legal requirement of an LTP, it's something that's there to inform the public and our wider stakeholders.
Councillor Balfour.
First of all, was there any effort to put a dollar figure on the spend in this area that we're talking about in this exercise?
No, I haven't gone and tallied it all up. I mean, you're looking at in the vicinity of sort of $3 to $3.5 million just in my group annually. But then, like I say, as far as I'm concerned, whether it's a social science, an engineering science, biosecurity, like I say, anything with an ology in it, that's a science spend. And when we collectively look at that across the council, it will be substantive.
Would that 3 to 3.5 you mentioned, would that include use of all the different external experts on various projects like the dam and so forth? So it's not doesn't include HBRC spend. Yeah,
it's just the
right.
council spend,
But
and
normally,
that's just our, our land science, our water quality, water quantity, coastal and climate. It doesn't include the money that Mike will be spending in Mike's group, depending on what's happening in policy, whether they've looked to engage social science or anybody else has. So those aren't included in that figure.
Sure.
Oh, excuse me. We'll come back to you. Can we just have a quick 5-minute break? We're going for a couple of hours. There's a cup of tea out there. I'll ask you to do your toilet thing or whatever and bring a cup back in and we'll carry on because there's a lot of hands up here. So just 5 minutes and come back.
5 minutes, no break.